I've been working full-time on my game in Unity for the past year, and in this video I'll be breaking down the journey and progress made, as well as some tips and tricks I've found that should help people in a similar position to me a year ago. This is my first commercial project, and more importantly, my first 3D and online project. The most important thing I've learned throughout this entire experience is that this whole game development thing's got layers to it. You think you're doing something right, only to find out 3 months later there's a better way to do it, only to find out 3 more months later that the previous way you were doing it that you thought was good enough was actually not even close to being acceptable in a large-scale project, and that this new way you just found out about is the actual way you should have been doing it in the first place. This example can be applied to every part of development, whether it's coding quality, 3D modeling, environmental design, UI design, the list goes on. Personally, it feels like sometimes I'm not making any progress, but then I look back on footage from almost a year ago and think, damn, I can't believe I actually thought I could make a video game by myself. The initial idea for this project was a new take on the Mario Party formula, a board game where you play a mini-game in between each round that rewards you with coins and items and decides the following round's turn order. My experience with this type of game was with Pummel Party on Steam, which, although fun, I couldn't help but feel like it fell short in a few areas and that the overall gameplay could be improved upon. My idea was to let players physically aim and throw their dice on their turn, with bonus targets spread throughout the board to increase your roll, as well as being able to bounce your die off other players' heads, dealing damage. This way, each turn it felt like you had something to do and that your skill had influence on how well you did on the board, unlike the gambling simulator that is Mario Party. Along with learning the technical and artistic parts surrounding game development, there's one more secret part that isn't talked about as often: the gameplay design language you must learn specifically for your project. What I'm referring to is the unique challenges created by your project's gameplay. Not just level design, but level design tailored to your game. In my experience with PartyChamp, it took a while for me to learn how to make a board layout that best complements the unique mechanics of the game. 1 month into development, I thought this board tile layout was the final version, but as development continued, I started to see some pretty big design problems. Mainly, the board was far too cramped and there were far too many tiles and they were too close together. The scale of the environment was too small and meant I'd have to make a lot of 3D models to populate the map. These are important factors to account for, as they can significantly increase dev time spent on a project. I was designing the board layout and then designing the environment and target bonus placements around it, when in fact I should have been designing all of these aspects in tandem. Not to mention the visual style of the game was still evolving throughout these early months of development. Taking what I'd learned from the development thus far, I restarted the board from scratch, making it more compact and designing areas around bonus target placements and landmarks. This board's gimmick is the road that cuts through the center of the map, with the previous iteration using it to open and close routes on the board, killing players standing in those tiles when the traffic lights changed. The new implementation creates a board hazard when the traffic lights are red. Players can still cross over these tiles to get to the other side, but they'll have to time their crossing just right to weave in between the moving cars. Dying means your turn ends, you'll respawn at the home tile, and you'll drop a portion of your coins on the board. You can toggle the traffic lights by hitting these targets above the road, or by landing on these special tiles in the board. This build was 6 months into development, with what I thought was the finished first board of the game. Although a far better iteration than the previous, with definite improvement in environment and level design, some areas lacked direction and I couldn't help but feel like I was trying to compensate for uninteresting environmental design with scattering clutter all over the board. Not to mention the performance cost of having so many 3D models, some of which with absurdly high polygon counts. There's a reason why these balloons become less prominent as the map changes continue. Looking at environment design in other games, both in the board game genre and in other genres like first-person shooters, it becomes more apparent how empty these maps are. Not empty in the sense that it's lacking or missing content, but more so in that they do a lot with very little. Areas feel populated with only a few props and main set pieces, with clear direction to map structure and flow. This is the real difference between a professional and an amateur. Now, to a certain extent, I didn't want to redo too much of this board because, you know, I actually want to finish making it and move on to the next board. However, this being the only board in the public demo, I really wanted to make a great first impression. Without touching the actual placement of tiles and more so the environment around the tiles, I began to declutter and open up some areas, knowing I'd come back and revisit the beach in the future, as it still felt like the most uninteresting part of the board, both in its visuals and gameplay. The UI design went through an overhaul, getting smoother, more colorful, playful visuals. I also caught some pretty unoptimized code that was tanking performance in menus. I did the main menu and lobby system, which will no doubt get one more revision before release. The cosmetics and player model got an upgrade, lowering polygon count and updating a few materials and textures. Optimization is something I'm yet to finish doing, but going forward I've got a better understanding of the basics like triangle count and draw calls. It definitely helps that there aren't many real-time lights. I mainly use baked light maps and there are no real-time shadows, which is a huge performance save. This applies not only to beginner Unity developers, but also probably anybody making a 3D game in Unreal or Godot. If you're new to this, learn good topology for your 3D models before you start making them. That means use mainly quads and no n-gons. Learn what models should be high poly and low poly, depending on how important or prevalent that model is in your game. You would be surprised when looking at geometry in other games, how low poly everything really is, and how much players don't notice or care when a sphere isn't perfectly round. Learn what draw calls are and why they're like the most important part about 3D rendering.
My goal was to sort of keep it at around 100 or less, if possible. Sometimes it goes up to 200, I think.
Learn what light map and light probes are and why, unless you absolutely must have all real-time shadows on everything, you should probably use them. I can't stress enough how much time this will save you in the long run if you learn this stuff before you start your project. It feels like most beginner tutorials on YouTube either don't mention these topics or skip over them entirely, when they're all pretty integral to 3D development, and not learning them at the beginning can cause complete chaos later in development.
How many of you would have noticed that the mulch is modeled in here? I didn't know what I was doing. I was just placing random assets everywhere. I was flipping.
I've even seen this with successful, experienced developers that mainly did 2D and are brand new to 3D development.
I'm looking at 1,800 batches, right?
Baby. Okay.
Yep.
Now we're cooking. Holy.
Yep, that's right. This is why people are getting issues.
It does not feel good to redo the same model for the third time because you didn't take the time to learn it correctly in the first place. It also doesn't feel good to redo the entire foundational code system for your gameplay, which is what I spent the first 2 weeks of this month's development doing. I already redid the board code once, but that was 10 months ago. I knew this was coming for a while. There were some completely game-breaking bugs that more or less required a rewriting of some main systems of the game. This is my first time doing networking in a project, and although Unity netcode simplifies it and provides easy ways of sending and receiving online data, you still need to formulate your overall systems correctly for a smooth, synced experience. I did not formulate my overall systems correctly for a smooth and synced experience. The new system gives complete control to the host, so basically any change that happens on the board happens only on the server, and only the necessary information is shared and synced with the other clients connected to the host, instead of before, which was, to put it lightly, a complete and utter mess. What it means for me as the developer is that it's a whole lot easier for me to change game states and add events to the board, and I know everything will be synced with all the players in the lobby, so it makes development going forward easier and faster. Next, I thought it was time to revisit the sections of the board that I still wasn't happy with. Both sides of the map felt like an afterthought, and to be honest, they kind of were. The construction area on the far right of the board was lacking in one main section, the bottom right corner of the map. With this single corner tile in focus, it pulled into view the empty far reaches of the board. The construction crane and pipe made the walkway more narrow, and this area let you see a little too deep into the void. It just really lacked direction and flow. This is where we get the first main casualty of this board update. I have removed the pipe drop trap. I really did try and figure out how I could fit this in, but it just wasn't working, and I already had plans to reuse the model in a minigame, so it's not completely wasted dev time. I can also reuse the logic for it in another board if I find a good place for it. For the beach update, I added some new raised grassy terrain to better frame the area and provide more visual variety, along with a Hollywood-esque Champ Coast sign to bring it all together. I can't help but think the development of this board progressed like a Fortnite map, slowly changing throughout its seasons. This is where we get the second main casualty, the sewer tunnel trap. This is actually something I made a while ago, but did not show in these development videos because I wanted it to be a secret. But it was once again, like the crane trap, something I just could not keep because of changes to the environment. But the logic is there for me to use in a different board if I want to repurpose it later. Activating the danger target on the beach would open a shortcut from the tunnel to the sewer cover in front of the coffee shop. This could then be used for the remainder of the round by any player to traverse the board. However, if a player was standing on the danger tile while the tunnel was opening, this would happen. I do love this idea, but with the new beach updates, it just didn't fit right, and with the traffic light mechanic on this board, it felt like it had enough danger already, and that piling on the crane and the crocodile on the edges of the board felt like overkill. There's still going to be player traps to look out for anyway. My plan for this first board is for it to be less experimental than the other ones, kind of acting as a more basic experience of the game, meant to be easier to learn and not too complicated, while maintaining its own unique gimmick and identity. It's the same reason why it's relatively flat, and there isn't a lot of verticality to the board layout. This is where my development footage ends, and I went a little crazy with the map rework, and may have overhauled everything! I really played more into the festival theme for this map, with crowd stands set up around the edges and these towers scattered throughout the board with big monitors displaying advertisements for what seem to be sponsors of the Party Champ event currently being held at Champ Coast. The construction area, if you can even still call it that, has this new scaffolding to enclose this edge of the map, keeping the focus on the board tiles. The crowd stands provide areas for bonus targets, as well as improving the visual flow of this section of the board. It also helps that the camera angle now changes as you approach the edge of the map. I replaced this shack and bench area with some foliage and trees, as it was mostly out of view anyway. The beach area maintaining its beachiness, but with better placed bonus targets and more obstacles that populate the area without causing clutter. As I'm recording this feature isn't fully implemented yet, but it might be by the time I edit the video. I added a new porta potty fast travel system to connect these two areas of the board, which should make up for the tunnel shortcut that was removed earlier. The lighting and color of almost everything has been tweaked to better fit the new art direction of the board. I wanted it to be brighter while still keeping the nighttime setting. For those who might miss the darker, moodier aesthetic, I do have plans for a much more neon punk styled board in the future, as well as a brighter, sunnier map, so stay tuned. The Steam page is not up yet as of the release of this video, but check the description if you're watching this later to wishlist. And I'm reopening the Discord because there's been a lot of people asking for it. Thanks for watching the video, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.